I'm Joyce. Hello and welcome. I'm from the Senior Center Producers in Highland Park, and today I have a wonderful guest for you, Roberta Dietzen, also known as Bobby, and she's going to talk about her book and genocide and the Holocaust. And first of all, she's an author, a teacher, and Illinois Rhodes Scholar. That's ROAD. And you could contact her if you're interested through her email, which will be listed at the end. And she's, first of all, how did you become a Rhodes Scholar?
Well, I wrote a book, Gypsy Music Street, which is a Holocaust memoir, and I had heard about the program. So I applied to be a Rhodes Scholar. I wrote about what my presentation would be about the Holocaust memoir, about genocide and standing up and trying to do something about genocide, not being silent and apathetic, which was the case during the Jewish genocide of World War II, where
Correct.
I lost many of my family members, and it had a profound impact on me, which is ongoing. It's not something you get past. So
it's always there.
It's always there, yes.
Even whether you were in there or not, because your mother experienced the what was going on. Too.
Well, actually, my mother came to the United States on the eve of World War II, which I write about in the book, not knowing what was going to happen at all. They had no idea. She lived in this town, Munkac, which was at the time located in Czechoslovakia, in sort of a remote area.
It's not far from Hungary, though, right?
Right,
Budapest.
exactly. Well, it's a 4-hour drive from
is
Budapest,
it?
which eventually we made this roots trip there. But at the time that she lived there was part of Czechoslovakia, although it was the Hungarian-speaking part, and it's in a remote area in the Carpathian Mountains in a valley. And so this was where she was from, and
she
she
always
came.
wanted to go back.
Well, she did, but she came on the eve of World War II, not realizing. They had no idea, she said, what was coming. They really didn't.
How did they choose her? I mean, because she had other siblings. Why was she chosen to come?
She chose herself. She was a young adult.
Oh.
She was about 26 years old. She had worked in a drugstore. She had 2 siblings already living in the United States, in the Chicago area, and a brother who lived in Israel. And she always wanted to leave for a better life, like most immigrants. She always talked very fondly about her town. There really was not any overt anti-Semitism there. This was a very unusual place. And I've done a lot of reading over the years. It was a very progressive country, Czechoslovakia. And the Jews had the same civil liberties as the Gentiles.
She called it like Little Paris, right?
Yes, she always used to say it was the little Paris of the East and talk about the beauty of the place, the mountains and the Latourica River. And it was a very religious town. You know, the Jewish people there were all very observant. You had Hasidic Jews and Orthodox, a lot of Zionist Jews there too, who wanted to migrate, to go to Israel. And then the Hasidic Jews, of course, were opposed to that. They didn't like that also. They would argue among themselves. But basically, she wanted to come for a better life. And she left not knowing what was going to happen, but the remainder of her family, she was from a very large family. One sister was in the United States, and then many brothers remained behind and perished as a result of the war, or some of them were in the Hungarian slave labor battalion, which was forced labor, and they died there. Or the ones that survived were scarred from that experience.
I was going to ask you if anybody survived, any other relatives.
Well, 3 brothers survived, and one went on to become very successful businessman.
In Chicago?
Yes, but he never talked about his experience. He used to tell people that he came before the war.
Yeah,
he didn't want to talk about it.
A lot of people don't like to talk about it. It's too painful.
Yeah, her other 2 brothers did survive, but it had a very big psychological impact on them, so they did not survive unscathed. And then, of course, she lost a lot of friends, and she would talk about her cousins. She had one cousin who had 4 small children. And, of course, you know, the mothers always were murdered when they had small children. They went right to the gas chamber. They didn't separate the children from the mother because they knew that that would create too much, you know, trauma, and it would have been too difficult, so they just sent them together.
Yeah,
and
they'd be screaming, the mothers.
Exactly. I'm sure. Yeah. So, so you know, I grew up hearing these stories. It was traumatic for me, and I don't think I realized that until recently. What a profound, ongoing trauma that it's like a post-traumatic stress disorder. When you hear from the time you're a little girl that your grandparents were gassed, that they were being told they were going to take a shower. And I heard this from the time I was 5 years old. It has, you know, an effect on someone. So But I did write the book after my mother died because she always wanted to go back to Munkacs. That was the name of the town, the Hungarian name. And
isn't it? It's part of Russia, or what? It's in that other country.
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah. What happened was, after it has a very complicated geopolitical history. This part of Europe. After it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that's why it was Hungarian speaking. After World War I, it became Czechoslovakia. Then during the war, because the Hungarians allied with the Germans, they gave this part of Czechoslovakia back to the Hungarians. For a few years it was Hungary, but after the war, the Soviets took control of that area. It became a part of the Soviet Union, and you could not travel there until its collapse in 1989 or 1990. And after it collapsed, it's now part of an independent Ukraine. So that's why we were able to travel there, although it was still considered, right after the collapse, it was still considered fairly a dangerous place to go. It's off the beaten path. It's not like it's a big city like Budapest or Prague. Right, it's remote, it's hard to get to.
Most people haven't. Did they have a lot of synagogues there?
You know, they did. It was actually this town, at the time she lived there, the population was about, I believe, 23,000, which was large at the time. And half of the population were Jewish. They were famous. If you know the history of Hungarian and Czechoslovakian Jews, a lot of people know this area. There were a lot of synagogues, caders, you know, the Jewish schools. They had a big Hebrew gymnasium. That was the secondary school, like a high school. And yeah, there were a lot of people from that town. This famous rabbi that she knew, Rabbi Shpira, his descendants live in Brooklyn now.
And he was buried in a mausoleum, right?
Yes, well, he's buried, right. He was buried, when we went back, we found his grave. The man that ran the graveyard pointed out that this was where Rabbi Shpira was buried. And I grew up hearing stories about him, and there's actually a video of him on the internet when his daughter got married. In 1933. My mother always said about 23,000 people came from all over Europe.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. My goodness. Yeah, you can see this video on the internet if you look. So.
Very interesting. And your mother wanted to go, but it was closed at the time.
Yes.
And when she was when it was opened, then she was too ill.
Right. My mother always talked about wanting to go back, and I was an expatriate living in Geneva, Switzerland from 1984 to 89. And it was still Munkacs was still in the Soviet Union, and my mother came to see us in Switzerland, and she kept talking. I thought she would enjoy being in Switzerland, like most people, right? I was jealous because my friends would say, "Oh, my mother's coming, and my mother-in-law, and they're so excited." And I said, "My mother just wants to go to Munkacs." You could not impress my mother. She was a character, but she was a wonderful lady. I think I appreciate her now more that she's gone. sometimes that happens. But
Do you have any sisters or brothers?
I do. I have a sister.
Oh, oh yeah, that's true. And your brother was ill.
He passed away.
And so there was no fighting actually there, was there? I mean, everything remained as it was?
Well, it was not bombed. Her
That's what I
town was
meant,
not
yeah.
bombed during the war. The tragedy of the Hungarian Jews was that her family was the last deportation to
Yeah.
Auschwitz in May of '44.
Yeah, I know.
That was the
Hungary
last, right.
Wasn't
The whole
somebody
world knew what
supposed
was
to-
going on.
Somebody was supposed to save them, a king or somebody. I once heard a story. I don't know if it was a king or somebody important, and
Well,
then they didn't.
there was someone called Raoul Wallenberg. He was in
Well,
Budapest,
yeah.
and
No,
he
it
was
wasn't him.
he was working to save the Jews from Budapest, and he did save several thousand Jews. I don't know about a king.
No, maybe.
I think Horthy, who was the regent of Budapest, he wanted to stop the deportations.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, it
Mainly
wasn't a
because he
king.
knew that the world was coming to an end, and he saw the handwriting on the wall, and that he
Yeah.
would be deemed a war criminal.
Oh.
Not because, that was his main reason. But the Germans were very intent on exterminating the Jewish people of that area. Adolf Eichmann, who was in charge of the final solution, came there himself. So that was the tragedy that they...
Did they know they were losing the war by then?
They knew they were losing
But
the war.
they still wanted to
Yes,
eliminate the Jews.
exactly. They knew they were losing the war. Everyone knew they were losing the war, but this was the last deportation. And by this time, the whole world knew what was happening to the Jewish people. They couldn't say they didn't know anymore. Nevertheless, the world stood by and did nothing.
I know.
And that was part of my presentation as an Illinois Rhodes Scholar. I'm going to talk about my book. And also, of course, the roots trip I made back to Munkac, and I went to Budapest, where my father was from. And that was an amazing experience.
Oh,
but
you wanted to go back, right?
I did. After my mother died, this was a way of dealing with the grief that I had. I wanted to see her town as much as she had. It was really a thrill for me to go back there. It was just so exciting to walk where my family had walked and to see the places that I had heard about my whole life. Such a lovely little city. And there's still a thriving Jewish community
Yeah,
there.
I was going to ask you about now. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the descendants of this famous rabbi who live in Spira, she used to pronounce it Spira. They live in Brooklyn. They support this community. And there's some very, very wealthy people from Brooklyn. There was someone who was born in Munkac, and they give a lot of money, and they rebuilt the synagogue, and they have a prayer house. And I did meet some of the Jewish community there.
Is there anti-Semitism there now?
I can't really speak to that. I don't know. It's changed completely.
Yeah. Well, there's so much anti-Semitism everywhere. But
Hungary, there definitely is a resurgence, or I don't know if a resurgence, maybe it never left, but they do have, there's been a lot of anti-Semitism in Hungary.
I heard that.
Although I went there and I loved Budapest. I loved hearing Hungarian again. Yeah, my father was from a little, not so little, a city near Budapest, Székesfehérvár. His father was an artist, a prominent artist, and so hearing the language, and we found some of his artwork that was in the archives. My paternal grandfather, and that was very exciting. And he actually painted a portrait of the Pope, an oil portrait.
Yeah, I read that.
Which I have in my home now. We never knew what to do with it, and I thought, what am I going to do with this portrait of the Pope? He painted it in the '60s. He became a saint.
Oh, yeah.
Pope John the 23rd.
Yeah.
But when I went to Budapest, there was a plaque in the courtyard of the Dohányi Synagogue, the biggest synagogue in Europe, honoring Angelo Roncalli, who became Pope John the 23rd. He, during the war, was a Monsignor living in Turkey, and he worked very hard to save Jewish people. So they were honoring him. And when I saw this plaque, I said to my husband, that's it. We are going
Into
home
our
and we're
house.
hanging a picture of the Pope. So if you come to the house of a Jewish lady, you're going to see a portrait of Pope John the 23rd hanging on the wall. I felt like this was a sign for me that I did not want to sell this.
No.
So albeit it's upstairs at the end of the hallway, but it's there.
You could always put it in the washroom.
No, it's a very large painting. No, I wouldn't do that.
No, well, people probably visit the washroom more.
Right. No,
anyway.
no. I don't have a big washroom for the Pope, but I felt like he deserved to have his portrait hung in my home.
Yeah.
And it was a piece of artwork that my father painted. I didn't want to sell it.
Yeah.
So that was a sign to me I was going to keep this painting in the family.
Your father came here too, right?
Right. My father came, but earlier. In the 20s. He was about 17.
Oh, so they weren't married yet?
No. No, they met in New York when my mother was living in New York. He lost family members too. While I was writing the book, I contacted. He even has a cousin that's still alive. I wrote about it in the book. Her and her mother went off. She was a teenager. I remember her from when I was a little girl living in New York. Very beautiful. She said she remembered Mengele. They went off with the aunts. They kept the families together. You know, they would stay together on the train, and they shaved her head. And just her telling me the story, it was kind of, very chilling to hear this, to know that you had family members that experienced this. Like when I think about my grandparents, who really weren't that old when they died. They were maybe in their 60s, I think, when they actually, my grandmother, when she was murdered. So I never had an opportunity to meet.
Yeah, and then like the people that were shot, they were all thrown in a grave together.
Right, I think that might have been what happened actually to my grandfather. That's sort of, I write about that in the book. His story, he might have been rounded up earlier than 44 and 41 because he was from Galicia. He was not a national Hungarian, and that's what they did. They took some people earlier and they put them on trains, and then they let them off, and there was a firing squad, waiting for them.
Yeah, and a lot of people even died on the trains.
Yes.
Conditions were so bad.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think about that. It's hard to get past those things.
Crowded and no food and
no water and
they didn't
mothers
know where
with babies.
They were displaced, from their families.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it would not have been a good thing.
No.
I guess we're lucky that we were not born at that time. So
my mother had a relative. He went back. He loved Europe so much better, so he was killed. He came here and he didn't like the United States, so he went back to
and he
Europe.
was murdered.
Oh,
My mother said too. Yeah, she had an uncle that had American passport, and he was a salesman, and he went to visit his family, and he got trapped there.
Oh yeah.
And he was murdered too. So that happened as well. I think that people, like my mother said, did not want to believe.
Yeah, they were in denial.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. They were in denial. She said, "Who could believe?" Who could believe?
10. And
Okay.
who could believe is
in my
right.
presentation, which I will be going around speaking in Illinois, I wanted to speak to not only, of course, my story and how it was amazing to go back and find all these places that my mother had talked about, but I wanted to talk a little bit about genocide, to have a discussion.
Yes.
Because the Holocaust was genocide, but the word Holocaust is applied to the Jewish genocide.
Right.
It was the first time there was ever such a large, mass-scale, premeditated murder, although there had been other genocides, Armenia, and then, of course, since the war, Cambodia, Rwanda, on and on now in Darfur.
Africa had a lot.
Right. What can people do as individuals? They sat back, silent, apathetic, indifferent. Not all, and that's it. I have several instances where I talk about, the Danes saved almost their entire Jewish population. They were able to ferry them across to Sweden.
Oh,
the Bulgarian Jews not the Jews, the Bulgarians saved most of their Jewish population, the ones that were living within Bulgaria, because they refused to cooperate with the Germans. They would not collaborate and point out who their Jewish neighbors were.
Good
so
for
they
them.
were able.
I never heard that.
Yes, well, I found out about that. I had heard something about it, and I did a little more research into it, and they never had a problem with their Jewish neighbors, and they didn't want to turn in and say, this one lives here. That's what they would rely on people to say, well, where are the Jewish neighborhoods and like that. So they didn't do that. And to their
very good. Yeah, I don't know if they get credit for it. I've
they
never
do,
heard that.
they do. And then Raoul Wallenberg, of course, he made an effort. So when people,
was
and it
he
took
Hungarian?
courage. He was not, Raoul Wallenberg was Swedish. He was a Swedish diplomat that was sent to Budapest, and he started working, making false papers. And of course this Pope, that he was Angelo Roncalli, he worked through the church to have false baptismal papers.
And then Schindler, but he was in another country, correct?
Yeah, Schindler, forgot already. That was Poland, I believe. That was early on in the war, I think. Forgot about his story, but so there were many instances. You needed courage, where people would make an effort to save other people, and when they did, miracles happened. And this can still be true today, where if you don't just sit back apathetically and watch these horrible things that are happening in the world, people's lives can be saved. So that is part of the discussion that I'm going to be having in Illinois, and I'm looking forward.
How do you know where to go to? I mean, how do you choose where do you go?
Well, the people choose me. As an Illinois Rhodes Scholar, I'm on their website. It's called I wrote down Illinois Humanities Rhodes Scholar Speakers Bureau.
Yeah.
And if they go, there's a Speakers Bureau roster, and there's about 35 or 36 presenters. We all have completely different presentations and programs, and mine is on there. It's called Gypsy Music Street, Genocide and a Daughter's Journey to Her Mother's Shattered World. And there's a few paragraphs there that describes what my program is about.
How long is the program?
It's about an hour, and I have slides and pictures from my trip that we took in Ukraine, and I think a lot of people are interested because it's not a place that most people go to.
No.
And so what they do is, if they're looking for a speaker, there's historical museums around Illinois, museums, senior centers, libraries. They go to this website, and then my information is there. They can contact me, and then we organize a time and a date. And then they need to, in turn, go back and contact the Illinois Bureau themselves to just make sure that they're, it's approved, because it is sponsored by this Illinois Rhodes, the Illinois Humanities Bureau sponsors these events, and it makes it's a nonprofit it makes it possible for nonprofit organizations to host these kind of events.
Are you going to Springfield?
Only if I'm invited. I would love to go to Springfield. I enjoyed Springfield.
Do you?
I like seeing the
Lincoln trips.
I do. I've been there before, and I really enjoyed it.
I've never been there.
It was very nice. They have a wonderful museum, and about Lincoln. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
So,
and I got, they
nice
were having
restaurants
package
there.
tours and everything. I got more literature in it.
Well, maybe I will go to Springfield.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yeah. Why don't you contact them?
I will. I'm going
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
I'm going to.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
A lot of work. And I'm still writing, so.
Do you intend to write more books?
Well,
or-
I've been working on a collection of short stories.
Oh,
So,
true stories or?
based on truth, right?
Oh,
I say I wouldn't have any more family or friends if I use
true
names, right?
Yeah, and the truth.
So let's hope no one recognizes themselves in my stories. So.
That sounds good too. And you were a teacher too?
Well, I was. I did. I taught English is a second language
Oh.
to foreigners, to adults. And I think because of my background growing up as an immigrant, in an immigrant household, and a Hungarian speaker, and then of course having this experience living in Europe, I understood what it was like to, actually I felt like I was the foreigner when I lived in Switzerland, and I couldn't speak French.
Oh, is that what they speak there?
That's what they speak in Geneva.
Oh, in Geneva.
And I had a very hard time. I didn't speak any French when I went there, and so I had to learn the language.
I mix up my Spanish and my French.
Well, it's similar in a lot of ways, but it was hard for me. And then, of course, learning the culture. I thought it would be a lot easier than it was.
Oh, really?
So
it seems like they would speak English. I don't know why.
Well, they do. A lot of people do, but not everyone.
No,
not everyone. So, and it's a different culture, of course.
Right.
So it was not an easy time. But like I say, when my mother came to Switzerland, I thought she'd be all excited about it, but
no.
Well, I think she enjoyed seeing her family and the grandchildren.
How long did she stay each time?
About a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
she stayed
first
with
time,
you?
I think it was 6 weeks. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, she stayed with me.
What is an expatriate?
That's someone who goes and lives in a foreign country for a certain amount of time. We were considered expatriates.
Oh.
It means we lived in Switzerland for 5 years and then we came home.
Oh.
We were not citizens of Switzerland.
No.
We were just there for...
I mean, what is the purpose of it?
Well, people have different purposes. My husband was working for a chemical company, and he got a position there, so he was in charge of chemical sales for Amoco of Europe. So.
Oh, I'd love to live in Europe. I should
Well,
have thought about it a
we
while
did
ago.
too. We thought it would be fun too, but it was hard. Okay.
Yeah, it was hard, especially with the different language. Your children went to school there?
They did. They went to school, and
they probably adjusted better, right?